Abhinav, for that insightful and thought-provoking presentation, and above all, explaining complicated matters in plain English, which is a true asset of a good teacher. So thank you so much. Of course, there will be questions because you spoke so much about the good things AI can be used for. But at this moment, Israel is using AI to list 100 targets a day for bombing. And the Israeli Defense Forces say that they want to eliminate Hamas. Now, thanks to this AI-generated targets, 21,000 human beings have been killed, out of which more than 70% are women and children. Obviously, the AI doesn't know that these children are not Hamas. Second point, there is a lot of talk of AI regulation. In Delhi there was a conference. European Union has passed some legislation. UK there was a conference. But you know, between you and me, nobody has raised a question about the military use of AI. I mean, nobody meaning politicians. There is a reason. No politician has raised that question. In other words, as of now, AI is being used. It's not theoretical. It's not for tomorrow. For military purposes, and the possibilities are really frightening. It might be possible, I may be wrong, it might be possible to create a weapon with the instruction, go out along Max Muller mark, turn right, and kill anyone who is having a height between 5 feet and 6 feet. Simple. So there are frightening possibilities, and not only possibilities, some of these possibilities are being realized unknown to us. By whom? By the military, industrial, congressional complex in the United States and their counterparts in the rest of the world. Anyway, now to look at all this from a philosophical point of view, and incidentally, here is physics, here is metaphysics, and why is it called metaphysics? Because Aristotle's works, philosophy came after physics, so that, philosopher can take a good look at physics. Over to you, Dr.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, sir, for the opportunity to come and present here some of my thoughts on artificial intelligence. I primarily got interested in artificial intelligence because I work in perception, and I was looking at computer vision and the applications that has. And that's how my interest in understanding artificial intelligence really started. But today I'm sort of coming from a very simple perspective, which is to ask the question that when we say that artificial intelligence is so progressive and so fantastic and wonderful, the question we have to ask is, just because something is progressive, is it also good? And particularly in philosophy, good is a word which has a very bad reputation. But still, it's a question worth asking, particularly because we have already experienced a kind of development pattern, carbon-based development, which has led to the kind of degradation that we have seen. And so, have we not already learned our lessons? But having said that, one also has to distinguish between what is often called augmented artificial intelligence and general artificial intelligence. So augmented artificial intelligence is the kind of softwares or programs that can be assistive to human beings. And so one has to analytically make a distinction between these two as well when we ask questions of whether AI is good, bad, or whatever else. But what we do see currently is times of great promise with respect to the potential of artificial intelligence. Promise because it has delivered results in medicine, in pharmaceuticals, in identifying what particular type of strain of a particular genotype will find you a resistant version of some, all kinds of complicated tech-assisted knowledge production that has been beneficial to human society. But the great peril comes from an anxiety about what to expect. Because we really, in many ways, don't have a clue as to where this is headed. So I was recommended this great book called The Coming Wave by Mustafa Sulaiman, by Dr. Abhinav. And in this book, The Coming Wave, he talks about 4 characteristics of the development and progress of artificial intelligence. Firstly, he says that there is a great asymmetry in the transfer and transformation of power that artificial intelligence has enabled. That is, whereas conventional military requires so much of billions of dollars of investment, hardware and so on in order to attack a potential enemy, with the coming of intelligence of this kind, you can do much more with possibly much lesser resources. So there has been a very disruptive transformation of how power is now shared between different parties. The second characteristic is the hyper-evolution of artificial intelligence. So if we look at the development of automobiles, we know that ever since there have been automobiles, there have been accidents on the roads, right? But because the pace of development was sort of measured in some controllable way, we were also in the process of evolution made capable of adding the necessary safeguards and studying what works and what doesn't work, and then progress in what, for lack of a better word, say in an organic manner. The way, the trajectory of progress that artificial intelligence has taken is exponential. It's beyond comprehension. The speed with which different programs and different softwares have developed. Thirdly, artificial intelligence and the kind of algorithms and programs that are being developed are fundamentally generic. So you can have the same application run multiple kinds of purposes. You can have one algorithm that solves the problem of entertainment, but also under different circumstances be an algorithm for how to attack a neighboring country. So it's fundamentally multi-purpose. And finally, that it raises questions of autonomy. So Dr. Abhinav just mentioned that there is the question of not having to worry about artificial intelligence because it doesn't have agency yet. But there have been chatbots which have communicated in ways that their own creators have not been able to comprehend. And also that it's not so much of a question about agency, because even human agency is problematized, typically. But it's a question about the potency of and the power with which artificial intelligence can wreak havoc on humankind. So one of the central concerns that people who are working in the ethics of AI have has to do with how the data is collected. So I'm going to talk a bit more about that. One of the fundamental problems with data collection is that it takes consent. So every time you download an app, there is that big list of things which you never really bother to read through and just press go, because, well, who cares? But it's consent of a weird kind. It's uninformed consent, because we really don't understand what we are consenting to. And when we do that, we are unknowingly giving into consenting to the violation of our own privacy, right? So you will see increasingly how when you talk about something or when you discuss something, an ad which is corresponding to your subject of conversation will immediately pop up in Instagram and Facebook and in other applications. And you don't even have to say it out loud. Sometimes it feels like this thing has simulated your mind. So you may even have a thought pop up in your head, and here it is when you open up some application. So we really have to worry about questions of privacy and security, because the kind of invasion that we're looking at is unprecedented. All of this becomes even more acute in the absence of clear legislation around the capacities to which these programs can be put. At least in the global south, we don't have enough informed discussions or even comprehension of the potential that artificial intelligence carries. So the consequences of that kind of immense power that this carries is that you often see that artificial intelligence-based algorithms will yield extremely biased and discriminatory results. Because this entire algorithm it's not concocted in a vacuum. It's trained on data that we are giving up when we consent to allow third parties to use our information. And so there is every possibility, and in fact it does happen, that the algorithms emulate the biases which are already present, and not only the biases but also the power structures. So whoever, like Dr. Karen mentioned, there is also a gendered reading we have to do of this, because a lot of access to the internet or to positions of power is typically male in nature, to specify just one problem. So data is biased, whichever way you look at it, but in the case of machine learning based on this data, the damage is that much more exponential. Furthermore, learning algorithms have the problem that they count every data point into evidence. Typically, in knowledge production, we distinguish between the description of an event and the justification of an event. So when we describe an event, we are literally looking at what the physical characteristics are and so on and so forth. But understanding or justifying the event requires us to look at the causal conditions because of which something has happened. It requires a deeper comprehension of why something is the way it is. But with programs that are trained on data, every data point is evidence enough. So all that you're interested then in is the probability that an event will occur, and that bare probability is enough for you to churn out whatever results that you're looking for. A third problem is also problems that arises out of the control of artificial intelligence programs being localized, but the responsibility being diffused, right? So Mustafa Sulaiman uses the example of how if you had a car crash, then the impact of that car crash would be somewhat localized, right? Maybe another car gets hit or somebody else gets hit, but the impact area is restricted to a large extent. However, when you have centralized control, like what Tesla and others are trying to do, the impact can be much wider. And this is being depicted somewhat interestingly in a new Julia Roberts movie, where there's an Armageddon-like situation and the highway is just stacked up with Tesla cars one after the other, because clearly there's no human control. It's all controlled by some algorithm or some program. So questions of who is culpable becomes a very difficult thing to ascertain, because with the extremely wide set of factors that can come into play in the successful execution of an algorithm, it becomes that much harder to place culpability in any particular location. Ideally, in an ideal situation, although things in the world are hardly ideal, but being in the philosophy business allows me to think in these ways. Ideally, any development associated with such a potent system of development should have been fundamentally a political process. It should have had legislation in place. It should have had deliberations which are entered into by citizens who live in modern democratically elected governments, who would have had the opportunity to understand the costs and benefits of what this kind of proliferation of technology leads to. And we know that in the post-liberal world, individuals' rights are already shrinking. So we need governments to take ethical, people-centered decisions about how we allow this to proliferate. Noam Chomsky said that, look, it may be great for all its applications, but we don't need this. So I want to also make a final comment on integrating AI in education. So a lot of teachers, well-meaning teachers who are concerned about their students, are now contemplating whether we should train our students in using ChatGPT and all these other programs, because at the end of the day, coming from the global south, we don't want our students to be left behind. And yet it makes one ask what was wrong in traditional education in the first place. Because knowledge production and education is a fundamentally social activity. It's premised on, a certain kind of history, a certain kind of contact. With Khan Academy and with all of those things, you're finding people isolating themselves more and more. So there is knowledge production, but there is no socialization. There is grasping of information, but hardly any assimilation. So is that the model of education towards which we want to go, which is clearly what AI-assisted education seems to me to be heading towards. So I want to end with a final question, which is the question that I started with: what really is progress? There's no one answer to it. There is no answer to the question of what is good or what is bad, but really is something good simply because it is progressive. Thank you.
Dr. Geever, you, as we expected, you have given us, enabled us to look at a big picture. That is what philosophers are meant to. You also have raised a number of questions: responsibility for a car crash or something worse. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have had a very good